When I was very young, not over 7 or 8 years old, my father told me of a murder that had been committed when he was a young man. It happened in a town adjoining the one we lived in Ohio. In those days, a murderer was hanged outdoors in broad daylight, and everyone was invited to see the act and all the gruesome details that went with it. It was an eager and anxious crowd, all pushing to be in at the final moment of death. My father managed to get well out in front where he could watch, but when he saw the rope adjusted around that man's neck, he could stand no more. He turned away, and he felt ashamed and humiliated for the rest of his life that he had that much of a part in the killing of a fellow human being. My father and mother weren't usual people. They were free thinkers in a valley full of rock-ribbed religionists. The only Democrats among Republicans as far as you could see, the only intellectuals. Would you believe that my mother thought that women should have the right to vote? Said so, right out loud as early as 1840. And I remember this very well, even though I was only 7 or 8 at the time. She never protested when my father kept me out past midnight, riding with him on a hay wagon, because underneath the straw were slaves my father was helping to escape from the South to the North, from slavery to freedom on the Underground Railroad. My father always did just enough work for hire. Carpentry, house painting, even driving a hearse to buy books. Hebrew, Greek, Latin, law, science, metaphysics, religion. He loved his books, and he loved us to read them. If I became anything at all, it was due to my father's patience and his books. And to be honest about it, a little hard work on my own part. When I was 9, my father set me to work on the hottest summer day I can ever remember, hoeing potatoes. Well, after I stood that hard work for several hours, I ran away from hard work and took up the practice of law. I haven't done a lick of work since. Why the law? Well, you see, in Kinsman on the 4th of July, after Squire Allen read the Declaration of Independence, which we thought he had written because he always read it, he introduced this lawyer from the county seat. I'd seen the lawyer's horse and buggy down at the hotel that morning. I thought how nice they were, how much money a lawyer must make. He didn't seem to be the least bit afraid to stand up in front of the public. I remember his boots. They looked shiny like they'd just been greased. Well, he waved his hands and arms a great deal and talked very loud. The old farmers nodded and clapped and said, "Mighty great man, mighty smart man." That's why the law. I've never been sure I made the right choice. The law is a bum profession as generally practiced, devoid of idealism, practically poverty-stricken of any real ideals. But see, I didn't learn that until I was in too deep to get out. My problem was I was fascinated by the idea of the law, the clash of good minds and the people you'd meet. And that was even better than baseball, except at one time in high school, with my girlfriend Jessie looking on, I came to bat in the last of the ninth. Us 1 run down, 2 men on, 2 men out, just like Casey at the bat. Only I knocked that sucker over the grocery store and won the game. By God, nothing would be better than that. Not even the monkey trial. I didn't have much education. 1 year of college, 1 year of law school in Ann Arbor. But you see, in those days, a committee of lawyers examined you for entrance to the bar, and they were all nice fellows, all anxious to help you get through. Today, the Bar Association is about as anxious to encourage competition as the Plumbers Union or the American Medical Association. My first lawyer business is drawing up a contract for a horse trade. Now, for this, I was paid 50 cents by each side. All that cash jingling in my pocket. I felt so flush and reckless, I asked Jessie to marry me. Made her so reckless, she decided to take a chance. Prettiest girl you ever did see. Kindest, easiest going, simplest in her taste. She had a lot of the small town in her. Well, I did too, because we were very happy together. We settled for 4 years in Ashtabula, Ohio. Horses being bought and sold at such a rate, we were able to set aside a small down payment for a house, $500 down. But at the last minute, the seller refused to hand over the deed because he was afraid we couldn't make the payments. I was so mad. I said, well, that's fine with us, because we're moving out of here anyhow. The next day I met this woman on the street, a woman I never cared much for. And she says, how's that prominent gun lawyer today? I said, fine, ma'am, just got me a big case. Oh, how nice. He in Ashtabula? No, Chicago. Well, that's lovely. When you plan to try it? As a matter of fact, tomorrow. Next day I took the first train to Chicago. I had to. That woman seen me on the street. She told everybody I was a liar. And I was. So I came to Chicago, straw in my hair, suit bought and fitted at the Ashtabula Emporium and Hardware. People tell me I've kept that look all my life. Some reporters at Scope's trial trying to give me a hard time. I said, listen here, fellas. I pay just as much for my clothes as you do for yours. The only difference is I sleep in mine. I came to Chicago at the most shameful moment in that city's history, when its citizens had asked for and been granted the death by hanging of 4 men they called anarchists. Of all the men I didn't get to stand beside until it was too late, sorriest I've ever been was a Haymarket anarchist. Started in the Chicago strike of 1886, when company police outside the McCormick plant shot 7 strikers. So a protest meeting was called in Haymarket Square. It was a peaceable meeting. About 10 o'clock, it began to rain, so most of the listeners drifted away. And there were only a few left in Haymarket Square when Captain Bonfield, acting against the mayor's specific orders not to come to Haymarket Square that night, charged into the square at the head of 180 uniformed men. "We're peaceable," cried the speaker, and the meeting was over. But at that minute, from one of the buildings above the square, some lunatic, now to this day, nobody knows who that lunatic was, but some lunatic threw a dynamite bomb. It landed among the policemen, killed 7 of them, and wounded 60 more. And it killed the 8-hour day, the socialist movement as well. 8 men were taken. Editors, lecturers, printers. 8 men accused not of throwing a bomb, but of committing the unpardonable crime of writing that capitalism is the source of misery, poverty, and crime. The state of Illinois charged them with conspiring with a man or men unknown, in a place unknown, in a manner unknown, to throw that bomb. They presented evidence manufactured by the police, and the judge admitted into testimony articles written by these defendants, and the judge told the jury, if you believe that these articles written by these defendants influenced that man or men who threw that bomb, you are justified in bringing in a verdict of guilty of murder in the 1st degree. Well, 4 of them were hanged. One of them, the youngest, Louis Ling, killed himself in prison. He bit down on a dynamite percussion cap and blew his head off. 3 were sentenced to long terms. And the city of Chicago pronounced itself satisfied. Still, Chicago was an extraordinary place. It meant life and excitement for me. New people, new ideas, good talks, good debates, and good friends like the great John Peter Altgeld, who helped get me a job as special assessments attorney for the city. Hell, I didn't know what it meant either, except it meant $60 a week. I worked for the city of Chicago for 4 years. And during that time, I went up against the railroads quite a few times, and right-of-way litigations generally managed to tackle. So one day, the Chicago Northwestern Railroad came to me, offered me a good job as their general attorney. I wasn't sure about that. Now, I didn't think my thoughts on life equipped me for that sort of work. But my friend Altgeld thought I should take it. So finally I did. He helped get us a nice home on the north side, where I hoped Jessie would be happy. Yeah, she wasn't. Not really. This big city with its big ideas, she felt it wasn't what she had bargained for, and She was right, it wasn't. But she grew not to like to do things. Jesse, how was your day? Did you get outside? Oh, it was beautiful down by the lake. You know, honey, I worry about you cooped up here with Paul all day long. Why, you could put him in his stroller and you could take a little stroll down by the lake. No, you don't have to if you don't want to. Wasn't one-sided, of course. Never is. For my own part, I wasn't home very much. During the day, I represented the railroads in court. Night, I went out with my good friends like Al Gill, freethinkers mostly. We talked law, politics, and books until dawn. I worked for the Chicago Northwestern Railroad for 2 years, until in 1894, Eugene Debs took his railway workers out in support of the Pullman strike, struck every railroad in the nation, including the one I worked for, so I had to choose sides. George Pullman, sleeping car man, had built a brand new home for his workers out of 500 acres of Illinois prairie. It was an extraordinary place. Listen to how he describes it. Bright beds of flowers, velvety stretches of lawn dotted with parks and pretty water vistas, homes filled with light, a place where all that inspires to cleanliness of person and thought is generously provided. I almost bought a home there myself, but there was one thing I couldn't figure out. Why anybody living in this Garden of Eden, this paradise, would ever want to go on strike? Was it possible that in this pamphlet printed by his own company, Mr. Pullman had inadvertently left out a few minor details? So I decided to take a train down there to see for myself. Well, sirree, Main Street was a vision. Bright beds of flowers, rows of tall green trees lining the walk. Houses, neat red brick with trim lawns. Ah, lovely. Just lovely. But there was one thing. Now, this is sort of curious. See, 1 block away from Main Street, where the workers lived, there were no lawns. There were no windows. They had at most 1 cold water faucet, and that was down in the basement where it was cheapest to run the pipes. 3, 4, 5 families crowded into each tenement, all using the same toilet. And in this place, where everything inspires to cleanliness of person and thought is generously provided, there wasn't 1 damn bathtub. Well, I talked to some of the people about it. I tried to talk to them. Most of them were afraid to talk. Every move they made was watched. Everything they said was reported back to the company. If a man even talked of joining the union, he was fired that day. His family was put out on the street, and his name was put on a blacklist that was circulated to every railroad in the nation. And the wages. 1894 was hard times. Skilled men who had been paid up to $3.25 a day saw their wages cut and cut until after Mr. Pullman took out his rent money, they had less than 4 cents a week to feed their families on. But the prices in the Pullman Company store where the wives had to buy stayed the same. 43 men asked permission to come in and tell Mr. Pullman that their families were starving to death. And they were given a firm commitment that they would not be fired if they just came in to talk. So, Mr. Pullman listened to the men, said, well, there is really nothing to discuss. The only obligation I have is to my stockholders, and I just can't see a reason of giving a gift of money to these men. The next day he fired all 43 of them and put his families out on the street. Well, that's when the Pullman strike started, and Debs pulled his railway workers out in support. Well, it didn't take our government any time to choose sides. They got one injunction making it a crime for a man to go on strike, another injunction making it a crime for a man to suggest to another man that he consider going on strike. But I never thought I'd live to see armed government troops pulled out against unarmed citizens on the streets of Chicago. Look at them! Look at them. 3,600 of them. Guns drawn, bayonets fixed, all lined up against the strikers. You know what day this is? You know what day this is? Well, it's the 4th of July. It's Independence Day. First, there were only angry shouts, then sticks and stones. Finally, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the men charged the troops, trying to disperse them. The soldiers started shooting just as they came. 7 strikers killed. Nobody in the army charged, but Debs and his entire executive board was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Whose murder? Whose murder? Whose murder? His own people's? And I went into the office of my boss, Mr. Marvin Huguet. I said, Mr. Huguet, Debs has asked me to represent him against you. I can't think of any reason to turn him down except my own selfish one, so I'm going to do it. Now, I don't believe in socialism, but I do believe that government ownership of the railroads is better for the people than railroad ownership of the government. Eugene Debs. They may have lived at one time or another, a kindlier, gentler soul, but I never met him. In the cell before his trial, he told me, he said, now Clarence, you go on home now. Get yourself a good night's sleep. We'll come out of this thing all right. If not this time, the next time. Members of the jury, if a small boy should steal a dime, he wouldn't be sent to the penitentiary. Small fine would cover the offense. But if 2 boys plot to steal a dime and don't even do it, they could both be sent to the penitentiary as conspirators. Not only could they be, but people are being sent there today under similar circumstances. This is an historic case, Your Honor, one that will count very much for or against liberty. Conspiracy, since the days of tyranny in England down to these days, where the railroads use it as a club, has been the favorite weapon of every tyrant. You see, it is an effort to punish the crime of thought. If any of you are still interested in preserving human liberty, I suggest you study very carefully the conspiracy laws of the United States, which have grown and grown until nobody's liberty is safe. But there is a conspiracy here, Your Honor. And I wish to say boldly to this court that someone is guilty of the foulest conspiracy that ever disgraced a free nation. If my clients are innocent, there are those guilty of entering this temple of justice and using the law that was made to shelter and guard and protect you and me, these defendants, using that law to hound innocent men to a prison pen. And this isn't the first time, is it? No, and we know it. This is not the first time that evil men who are themselves criminals, have conspired to use the law to bring the righteous ones to death or to jail. They sentenced Debs to 6 months in Woodstock jail. He got off easy. No other offense has ever been visited with such severe penalties as seeking to help the oppressed. They put him in a cell made for 8 people. Outside the barred windows was a beautiful flower garden. In the cell with him was a simple mountaineer from the south His only crime had been to help nature convert corn into whiskey, and he couldn't imagine why he was there. Any more than I can imagine why men who call themselves civilized build cells. Well, there were 3 or 4 others in the cell with him, and the place had the atmosphere of one big happy family. And it was because it was radiant with the kindness and love of Eugene B. Debs. He told me, he said, "Now, Clarence, this place isn't so bad. I look out there and I see the flowers. Well, I know the bars in front, but I don't see the bars." Well, after Debs, I didn't consider going back to work for the railroads. Fortunately, labor was as well disposed towards me as I was towards labor. So for the next 17 years, I was to represent them in some of their most important cases. Now, that arrangement did last happily, I think, on both sides until in 1911, I was retained by the American Federation of Labor to represent the McNamara brothers in the Los Angeles Times bombing case. Now, after that was all over, organized labor wouldn't have anything to do with me. In fact, men spat in my face as I left the courtroom. But that wasn't for 17 years. In the 90s, I was practicing law in Chicago, mostly on the side of the weak, sometimes on the side of the strong, but never on the side of the strong against the weak. Had mostly a criminal labor civil practice, and I felt happy in my work, felt useful. Being a lawyer in Chicago in those days put you in touch with malefactors of all sorts. And I want to tell you too, the Illinois legislature was none too good in those days. In fact, I've never known the representatives to be any different except in times of great moral crusade when they're always worse. You see, we had at that time in Chicago a bunch of massage parlors being used as fronts for houses of prostitution. In fact, it got to the point that the word massage meant, well, I guess you can figure out what it meant. And to give someone a massage meant, well, I guess you can figure that one out too without my spelling it out for you. And just to interrupt myself for a minute, you know, I've always believed that lawyers in general, myself included, are always apt to say more than is necessary. I'm reminded this time that a lawyer was asked to represent a man who was accused of biting another man's ear off in a fight. Now, there was only one witness. Counsel gets up to cross-examine and he says, "You mean you didn't see my client bite that man's ear off in that fight?" "No, sir," was the reply. "Well, he should have sat right down then. Everything had been hunky-dory." But he's always bound and determined to ask one more. "Well, if you didn't see my client bite that man's ear off in the fight, how can you be so dead sure he did bite the man's ear off?" "Well, sir, I did see him spit it out." Anyway, as a result of this great reform movement, all the massage parlors were closed down, thus preventing a lot of hardworking masseuses from earning a living. So a representative of their organization came to me, asked me to get an injunction against their being closed down. Did too. Got the ordinance revoked. On my way out of court, the state's attorney nudged me and said, "Clarence, you gave the state a good massaging on that one." After I went out on my own, I didn't have too much trouble getting clients. One reason was I never charged a fee if a man couldn't afford to pay. Well, that's as it should be. Lawyers have to do a lot of things for which they cannot hope to be compensated. The only thing that we can do is just hope now and then we can meet some client who can afford to pay. And this young man came to me, asked me to defend him on a charge of robbery. He said he wanted to pay a fee, insisted on paying a fee. He didn't have any money right then, but he planned to raise some by that evening. I told him, "Now, get yourself another lawyer. I don't care to accept money that's been stolen." So recently, I went to Cook County Jail. I told the prisoners there what I actually believe, and that is, there's no such thing as crime, as the word is generally understood. If every man and woman and child had the opportunity to make a decent living, there would be no such things as courts, and lawyers, and jails, and there should be no such thing as jails. If you do away with them, you'd have no more criminals than you have today. Well, one of the guards asked one of the prisoners what he thought about my speech. "Darrow is too radical," the man said. "Well, I've told a lot of men during my lifetime what I thought they ought to do. Usually 12 at a crack. Sometimes they had the good sense to listen to me. Sometimes they had the good sense not to. But I've been telling everybody I could get my hands on that they ought to take the best friend I ever had, the most honest, incorruptible man in the world, John Peter Altgeld, and elect him governor of Illinois. And damn if they didn't, too, in 1892. Now, it was commonly believed that his first act would be to pardon the Haymarket anarchist. There were still 3 of them alive, still in prison. I certainly believed it. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't his first act. It wasn't his second. It wasn't his 100th. He said when he had the time, he'd go over the case and do what he thought was right, but he had to do it in his own time. Well, I went to him several times to make the suggestion. He always managed to elude me. Finally, I went to him one last time, and I said, "Now look here. Everybody's expecting it. It's not going to bring any animosity towards you. And frankly, I and the rest of your friends just can't see any reason to put it off any longer." But he looked at me and quietly said, "Clarence, I don't want to lose your friendship, but don't deceive yourself. If I conclude to pardon those men, it will not be met with any approval. In fact, if I conclude to pardon those men that very day politically, I will become a dead man." He studied the case and granted the pardon. 2 years later, he ran again for governor, and he was defeated. He knew he would be. He could never win another election after that. And the reason was always the pardon. The newspapers fought him bitterly, but in the mills and the mines and the factories, he was worshipped almost as a god. No, he couldn't govern his people anymore, but he could serve them, and he did that until the day he died. In all the country, nobody has it worse than the Pennsylvania coal miners. Men who work underground in 12-hour shifts 365 days a year without even Thanksgiving or Christmas off. Men whose 10-year-old daughters work in the mills next to the mines for 3 cents an hour. Well, the president of the Philadelphia and Reading coal mine says, "Well, these people don't suffer. Why, they don't even speak English." You say you love little children, sir. Well, I've no doubt you do. Just as a wolf loves mutton. You're a breaker boy, Johnny McCaffrey. Now that means that they put you and 100 others like you straddle a chute. When that old coal comes running down, you pick out the slate. What'd you say that takes, Johnny? Quickness? Quickness, I bet. Not to lose a finger, a hand, or an arm. Has that ever happened to any of your friends, Johnny? Oh. Well, how many of your friends? A lot. Do they feed you, Johnny? They feed you before they send you down the breakers? Will they give you anything besides one potato to last the whole day long? They ever let you see the sun? They ever give you one day off? You don't look very old to me. How old are you, son? Well, when's that birthday? When will you be 11? You mine anthracite coal, Mr. Griffiths. How much they pay you for that? $2 and 2 bits a week. And that's for a 12-hour day, 7-day week. What vein are you working in now, sir? Oh, how's the air down there? Oh, what do you mean, bad? You get headaches? What, did you ask the company for a doctor, or does the company have doctors for the men? What did you ask them? Oh, I see. They wouldn't. Now, I'd like to ask you about the time you lost that leg. Did the company offer to buy you a wooden one? You mean they acknowledged that the accident had happened in the mine and still they wouldn't? Members of the commission, this demand for an 8-hour day at a decent wage is not a demand to shirk work, as is claimed in this case. There's only one standpoint from which you have the right to judge this question, and that is, what will make the best man, the best American citizen who will build up a nation we can be proud of? The laborer who asks for shorter hours asks only for a breath of life, for an opportunity to build up the best that is in him. It's no good to say, well, if you give him shorter hours, he won't know how to use them. Our country, our civilization, is built upon the belief that there is in every man, a divine spark that will always make him look upward and reach upward for something better than he's known before. It took the commission a month to hand down its findings. Before we came to Chicago, I told Jesse I'd rather help the men get the 8-hour day than be elected president. Now that we'd won, there was nobody to share it with. Jesse and I have been drifting apart for a long time, and now the house and Paul were all we had in common. Jesse, you and I have been going down different roads for a long time now, and now we're just not at the same place at the same time anymore. No, I didn't say it was all your fault. But you think it could be different after 18 years? Oh, I don't know, Jesse. I don't know. I'm probably making a mistake, but I've got to have my freedom. I'm sorry, Jess. Sorry. Well, now that I was alone, I found myself fighting harder than ever for things I believed in. We'd made a beginning in Pennsylvania, but in the West there was open warfare between the miners and the owners. A man named Harry Orchard, as low a specimen as you'd ever want to see, killed the former governor of Idaho with a bomb and said that Big Bill Haywood, the Union man, had put him up to it. Well, at the time the charge was made, Bill Haywood was 1,500 miles away in Denver, Colorado, in his Union office. So the new governor of Idaho, Governor Gooding, sent deputies out in the dark of night without a warrant to kidnap Bill Haywood and bring him back to Idaho for hanging. Well, of course, the United States Constitution guaranteed Bill Haywood a fair trial. Governor Gooding, in his own words, did declare Bill Haywood would never leave Idaho alive. Everybody in Idaho stood up and cheered. Everybody but the miners. The trial lasted 80 days. 80 days of vituperation, rage, and hatred. The judge's own daughter said it sounded like 80 days in an insane asylum. I know, I was there, and I felt like an inmate. I took the side of Bill Haywood. Well, he was a big man. Toughest man I ever met. Absolutely fearless, honest, incorruptible. Strong as an ox on the inside and out. Terrible temper. Only one eye, like a pirate. Well, I don't mean to suggest the working man has always been right. He's often been wrong, sometimes cruel, sometimes corrupt. I know he's often unreasonable and unjust, but to hang Bill Haywood or any man on the testimony of Harry Orchard, let's see. Harry Orchard, a self-confessed perjurer, a man who robbed his fellow miners of their ore, a man who killed a drunken man on a dark street at night, A man who tried to kill the governor of Colorado. A man who, by his own admission, threw a dynamite bomb into a railroad station and killed 30 men. This is the man on whose testimony you're going to hang Bill Haywood? Well, this murder was cold, deliberate, cowardly in the extreme. And if you honestly believe that my client in his office 1,500 miles away employed this miserable assassin to come here and do this deed, and by God, by all means, you hang him by the neck until he's dead, dead, dead. But I think I must be dreaming in this case. I cannot believe that here in Idaho or anywhere in the world, a man can be placed on trial and lawyers seriously asked to take the life of a man on the testimony of Harry Orchard? For God's sake, what kind of community exists up here that sane men should ask for it? Do I have to come here from Chicago to save the honor of your state? You can't give Bill Haywood back the 18 months he spent in the Boise jail. If a man is so insane as to go out and work for the poor, as Bill Haywood has always done, these are the wages he receives. And the wages he's always received since the first foolish man went to agitate for the upbuilding of the human race. But it is not for Bill Haywood alone I speak. I speak for the poor, the weak, the weary, the long line of men who in darkness and despair who have so long borne the labors of the human race. Their eyes are upon you, people of Idaho, tonight. Or if you kill Bill Haywood, there are many who will applaud you. In the railroad offices of our great cities, among the spiders of Wall Street, and in every bank where men hate Haywood because he fights against the system by which the favored grow rich and fat. Oh, from these you will receive blessings and unstinted praise. But if your verdict should be not guilty, there are those who will bow their heads tonight and thank their God for the life and reputation you have saved. Out on the broad prairies where men toil with their hands, and on the wide ocean where men are tossed and buffeted by the waves, the mills and the mines and factories deep down under the earth, thousands of men and women and children will kneel tonight and ask their God to guide your hearts. On my way out of court, a sympathetic reporter leaned over to me and said, "Well, it takes 12. I told him, no, only takes one. See, in Boise, all we could hope for was a hung jury. Well, about 5 o'clock in the morning, an eavesdropper overheard the jury taking a poll. And the vote was 11-1. Now, of course, Boise, that meant 11-1 for hanging. The eavesdropper told a newspaper reporter, and there was an extra on the street in a matter of minutes. All Boise rose up for joy. The women wore their finest jewelry down to breakfast. The men their finest suits and ties. They were all waiting for this one stubborn juryman to give in so that their barbecue and picnic could start. Finally, he did give in. Gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. What is your verdict? Not guilty. Not guilty. Well, by this time I figured I'd had my fair share of the fighting. It hadn't been so easy to go up against the powerful forces of society as I'd always done. And after all the conflict, I needed a rest. Besides, in my own life, after years of loneliness with Jessie and years of loneliness without her, I'd met someone. Well, Ruby. She was a newspaper woman, damn good one too. She was redheaded and beautiful and we fell in love. Up to that time, I'd felt maybe like some of you fellows that getting married was kind of like going to a restaurant with a friend. You order what you want, but when you see what your friend got, you wish you'd taken that. I've always been a finicky eater. I don't like spinach, and I'm glad I don't, because if I did, I'd eat it, and I just hate it. And I don't like shredded wheat, and I don't like anybody who does. After Ruby and I got married, we'd been content to stay right there in Chicago, and I didn't want to go all over the country finding new fights to fight. But in 1911, Los Angeles Times building blew up with 20 men killed. And Sam Gompers of the AFL persuaded me I'd go down in history as a traitor to that great cause if, in this hour of the direst need, I didn't take charge of the McNamara defense. Well, I didn't want to go. I pleaded to be excused. But hard as it was to say yes, it would have been harder to say no. So, Ruby and I left for Los Angeles. Los Angeles, known to every working man in the world as the scabbiest town on earth. Los Angeles Times and its publisher, Harrison Gray Otis, they ran the town. They fought the unions, and they won. They always won. Otis was a man to reckon with. He was a big, loud man with a walrus mustache and a goatee, military bearing. He looked like, somewhere between General Custer and Buffalo Bill. He was a terrible man to work for. But there were a few people who found things not to admire about Mr. Otis. Hiram Johnson, the distinguished San Francisco senator, was one of them. In San Francisco, now this is Johnson talking, we have drunk to the very dregs of infamy. We have had vile officials and rotten newspapers. But in San Francisco, we have never had anything so vile, so low, so debased, so infamous as Harrison Gray Otis. He sits there in senile dementia with gangrened heart and rotten brain, grimacing at every reform, chattering away impotently all things that are decent, frothing, fuming, violently gibbering, going down to his grave in snarling infamy. Here's the one thing that all California sees when they think of anything that is disgraceful, depraved, crooked, corrupt, and putrescent. That is Harrison Gray Otis. Well, Otis could give as good as he got. According to the Times, Union men were never anything but cutthroats, assassins, thieves, lunatics, anarchists, swine. No Union man was ever employed by the Times in any capacity. This is war, Otis said, and he was right. Years of bitter struggle till that morning of October the 1st, 1911. An explosion was started in an alley outside the Times plant. That explosion in turn started a terrible fire which trapped 20 men, machinists, printers, compositors, and burned them to death. But before the fires had cooled, before anyone knew what on earth had happened, Otis printed this in his papers. "Oh, you cowardly killers, you anarchic scum, come view the ruins wherein lie the calcined remains of those whom you murdered." A man named Orty McManigal was arrested on the charge, and to save himself, he told the police that two good friends of his, James B. and John J. McNamara, who were brothers and leaders of the structural ironworkers, had planted that bomb at the Times. Well, at the time the charges were made, James B. was in Illinois and John J. was in Indiana. So Los Angeles police sent deputies out in the dark of night, just like the Haywood case all over again, to kidnap the boys and bring them back to Los Angeles for trial. History repeats itself. That's what's wrong with history. I went to see my clients first time in jail. James B. was 28. He was lean, touch of the poet. And John Jay was 27. He had this air of Irish melancholy about him. And he'd studied the law. I liked both of them instantly. So that very day, I began to assemble a staff and start the months of preparation for the defense. I put every ounce of energy and devotion I had in that case. I went to lengths I had never gone to before, tracking down witnesses and evidence all over the country. Even hired a detective, Bert Franklin, to investigate prospective jurors. Now, when we started out, we knew just one thing, that all laboring people, all working men, believed with all their hearts that the McNamara's were innocent. Every union in the country contributed to the cause. And we got letters from poor working men who wanted to contribute a small part of their savings for the defense. But the more deeply involved I got into the case, the more absolutely certain I was, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the McNamara's had planted that bomb. Everything R.T. McManimal said they had done, they had done. And not only that, they had left a trail a mile wide, so the state should surely hang them. Why? Why in God's name? Why? I asked James. But at first he wouldn't answer me. And finally he said, well, Mr. Darrow, there was a labor parade. The cops beat up our boys awful bad. The next day, the Times praised those cops for their heroic work. I don't know, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bear the thought of their hanging, but I didn't know how to prevent it. I didn't know what to do. Finally, it came to me that maybe if the boys admitted to everything before the trial began, maybe, just maybe, the prosecution would let them plead guilty and go to jail. I decided to try it. I didn't have any other choice. I couldn't even tell Gompers for fear of jeopardizing the negotiations. Well, after weeks of negotiations with the prosecution, weeks of negotiation with the McNamara brothers, weeks of negotiation with Harris and Gray Otis, we were able finally to conclude an agreement that at least saved their lives. Full confessions, life in prison for James, and 15 years for John. But my negotiations were completed so late, the jury list had already been drawn up. Still nobody knew what I had done. And so on the day of the trial, they staged a parade. Thousands of well-wishers. They cheered me all the way to the courtroom. I had to push them aside to get inside the courtroom. There, as on every city in the nation that day, working men proudly wore their badges. McNamara is not guilty. If it please Your Honor, my clients like to change their plea from not guilty to guilty. There wasn't a sound in that courtroom. Nobody could believe what they heard. Then some got up shaking. Some wept. Some cried aloud in their anger. All labor. All the people who had believed with all their hearts the McNamara's were innocent had been told suddenly and without warning they were wrong. They felt betrayed. Some felt that I was the one that betrayed them. It was a long time before the courtroom emptied out. I went out with the rest. It's getting dark. So a few street lights had been turned on. McNamara buttons lay just where they'd been thrown, in the gutter. A friend of mine, a policeman, Billy Cavanaugh, he was alarmed by the number of people who were shaking their fist at me and calling me a traitor. So he came to my side and said, "Now, Mr. Darrow, you come along with me." I'm not a brave man. But I looked him in the eye and I said, "No, Billy, I think I'll just go with the rest." I walked with him when they cheered me. Now, if you don't mind, I think I'll just go on home the same way.
7.
Million.
Oh, yes.
Two days after the McNamara trial was over, before I could get back to Chicago and my friends, I was myself arrested and indicted on 2 charges of trying to bribe, suborn, fix the McNamara jury. One of my associates had hired Bert Franklin, a detective and former investigator for the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, to investigate prospective jurors. Well, he did a little more than that. He offered 5 of them bribes to bring in the verdict not guilty, and if that weren't possible, to hang the jury. You know, there's no doubt about what Franklin did. He was caught by 5 Burns detectives on the corner of 3rd and Los Angeles in broad daylight, handing over a $500 down payment to the juror Lockwood. I was across the street. I saw him do it. Well, for weeks, Franklin wouldn't say who he was acting for, if anybody. But he did say at that time, I had nothing to do with it, had no knowledge of its being done. And Franklin was placed on trial. He pleaded guilty. And after that was settled, he told the grand jury that I was the one who had given them the money, told them who to bribe, how, and with how much. So, I was placed on trial. My trial lasted 3 months. 92 days. Longer than Debs, longer than Haywood, longer than any man I ever defended. Joseph Ford. Joseph Ford. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office started off the trial by calling me a coward in court. He said I had corrupted some of the best men in Los Angeles. He said I had sacrificed John McNamara to save myself. He called my conduct viler than anything Judas or Benedict Arnold had done. He said, since I had written there was no such thing as crime, I had encouraged the McNamara brothers to kill innocent men. Therefore it was Darrow, not the McNamaras, who was guilty of murdering those men at the time. Then and throughout the trial, he called me a liar and a perjurer. Well, I don't suppose I have ever in my life wanted a man to meet up with his maker before his appointed time. But there have been a few obituary notices I've read with approval. I don't think I could have stood the trial without Ruby. She was at my side day in and day out, in court and out. You see, I think it was hard on her in some ways than it was on me. We were strangers here, in a city with very few friends. And the friends we had thought I had done it. Even my old friend, the policeman, Billy Cavanaugh, came up to me and he said, "Mr. Darrow, why did you go down there and get yourself caught? Why didn't you send me? You could trust me. I'd have watched Franklin for you. Oh, when Judge Hutton called out the case, the people against Clarence Darrow, my lawyer, Earl Rogers, stood as I had always done so many times before and said, "Ready, Your Honor." And he had to nudge me to get me to stand. He said, "Clarence, you're the defendant." Of course, I took an active part in my own trial. Members of the jury, I'm a stranger here in a strange land. 2,000 miles away from my home and my friends. But I will venture to say that no one in my hometown would have ever made the remarks made of me, the district attorney made of me in the opening of this trial, because afterward he could not have found a single companion in the entire city of Chicago, except among crooks and detectives. But look at it. Think of it this way. Here I am in his hands, in a position where he can call me a coward. But in all my life, I have never witnessed a more sneaky, brutal, cowardly attack as was made by Mr. Ford in the opening of this trial. When Mr. Ford examined you, before you accepted as jurors, he asked you, "Should I address you, would you be carried away by sympathy?" Well, you won't be. Now, if you're expecting me to ask for sympathy, I've never asked for sympathy from anyone in my entire life. And I don't think I would start with this jury. In fact, I had rather go to the penitentiary than ask for sympathy. But if I'm going to the penitentiary, it would be a great solace to me in my long days of confinement if I could believe that you acted with common sense and weren't carried away by Mr. Ford's remarks. Now I ask you, does it really look like a case of jury bribing, or does it look like something that was framed up? Mr. Franklin swore to you that he believed that the jurors, Yonkin, Smith, Underwood, and the man Franklin were all honest, incorruptible men. But he goes forth to bribe them. Now, what else does Mr. Franklin do? Well, he puts $500 in his pocket and goes over to bribe Mr. Bain. But Mr. Bain isn't at home. So he goes over to the neighbor's wife and leaves his calling card. Well, there's a detective for you. Why, he's got Sherlock Holmes faded and Burns beat 40 ways to one, and you're expected to stand for a story like that. No. You don't have to stand for it. All you do is bring in the verdict. I have to stand for it. Well, I've said all I cared to say about Franklin. I said more than enough. I've said too much. But I do have to ask you to consider his story. Is it reasonable, or is it absurd? Your Honor, I would like to move that we adjourn court today. Let's try this case Monday on with the insanity cases. Leave out the moral question. Leave out the tradition of a profession I practiced for 35 years. Do you honestly think I would take a chance like that? To all those gumshoe boys in town, their eyes on everyone connected with this case, detectives thick as lice in Egypt. Don't think that your liberty is safe. Don't think your family is secure. Don't think that anybody's liberty is safe when under evidence like this. Evidence like this! I, a man of some respect, some reputation, can be brought here and put in shadow of the penitentiary. I know my life. I know what it's been. It hasn't been perfect. It has been human. Far too human. But I have tried to help out in this world. and I've not borne malice in my heart. I've just done the best that I could. And now I must ask you, save my liberty and my name. The jury was out only 34 minutes when he came back. I thought he was to ask Judge Hutton for further instructions. But the foreman, Williams, announced he had a verdict, and he smiled and called out, "Not guilty!" Well, Ruby was at my side, and we hugged and kissed. First man to get down to us was Judge Hutton, who ran down from the bench to embrace me. And we shook the hands of all the jurors and hundreds of other well-wishers. It was 2 hours before we could get out of the courtroom. I'd said before we came to Los Angeles we had very few friends, but that wasn't true by the end of the trial. There were a lot of people who were very kind to us. One of them was Senator William Burrough, who prosecuted the Haywood case that I defended. During the trial, someone suggested to him that since I'd bribed the McNamara jury, maybe I'd done that with the Haywood case. Maybe that's how I'd won. Burrough said, "No, Clarence didn't bribe those jurors. He just frightened them to death." Another man was a man I never met. He was Fred D. Gardner of Hot Springs, Arkansas. During my trial, I received this telegram from Mr. Gardner. "I see by the papers if you exhausted your last dollar of your savings in your defense. You've always seen to it the poor got a show. Now you shall have every chance that the law affords to prove that you're innocent. If you will wire me the money you require, I will send it to you immediately. Signed, Fred D. Gardner, Hot Springs, Arkansas." Well, I wired him back. His kindness was so great I could hardly understand it. "Yes, my condition as you stated. But I don't know your situation, Mr. Gardner. I don't know whether I should let you do something like that." He wired this back. "Sending money today. We'll send more if necessary. Take heart, be of good cheer, prove to the world that you're innocent. You shall not be lost to the poor of this world on account of a few paltry dollars for a legitimate defense. Fred D. Gardner, Hot Springs, Arkansas." Well, in a few days I received his check for $1,000, $200 from his wife from her own savings. Learned later that Mr. Gardner was not a wealthy man. He had a small factory, and he frequently had labor troubles, and he was unsympathetic to unions. But he didn't let any of that bother him. He was just a wonderful, wonderful man. I was glad to get back to Chicago and my friends, you can possibly imagine, but it did seem like for a long time Chicago wasn't so glad to see me. You see, that's how it is sometimes. The charge hangs on after the acquittal. It took some people a long time to forget what they thought I had done. Some people never forgot. Of all the clients I had represented before my own trial, corporate, labor, or individual, not one ever asked me to represent him in court again. Looked like my lawyering days were over. And then a very kind young man, Peter Sisman, who had apprenticed with me in the old firm in Chicago, asked me to come in as his partner. I told him I didn't think so. I thought I was through with the law. I just didn't have my heart in it anymore. He said I had to. If I didn't, it'd be a tacit admission of guilt. Well, then I told him, I can't bring any customers. He said, "That's all right, Mr. Darrow. That's all right." Well, it was 3 months before I got a client. A whole year before I started pulling my own weight. We had mostly a criminal practice, and I met and defended some very poor, unfortunate souls. Murderers, alleged, or in fact. And I never hesitated to defend a man on a charge of murder, if only to prevent a second one by the state. One of them was Isaac Bond, black man. A white nurse was found murdered in a lonely spot outside Chicago. Her body was almost naked, badly mutilated. She had last been seen going down the road in the company of a tall black man. So Chicago police went through their files of ex-convicts, and they found a picture of Isaac Bond, who had served 4 years in a Missouri penitentiary for killing a white man in self-defense. Bond was black, and he was tall. And there was nothing else to connect him with that case. But the police printed his picture in the newspaper. Bond saw the picture, went straight to the police station, gave a detailed account of the work he had been doing in Gary, Indiana on the night of the murder. So they locked him up immediately. I went to Gary, Indiana, and I interviewed all the men who had worked with Bond on the night of the murder. And I'm sure I convinced the jury that there was not one shred of evidence to connect him to that crime. But the best he could get was a life sentence. The jury brought in a verdict not against Bond, but against the horrible murder that had been committed. Bond just happened to be the first person accused of it, and of course he was black. I went to the pardon board years later, and I'm sure I convinced them that I was right. One of the members even told me he was absolutely sure beyond a shadow of doubt that I was right. But he didn't dare touch the case because the murder was so brutal and revolting. Bond served 10 years in the penitentiary where he contracted tuberculosis and he died there. These were hard times for unpopular people. One of the things I started doing, and I got back to Chicago, got to pay the bills those first years, and well, I got to like it as much as anything I did. That was lecturing and debating on the Chautauqua circuit. Of course, I always took the anti-side in any debate. I always liked getting up after my opponent had received his ovation, and me facing an audience of 500 or 1,000 more, all hoping I'd fall flat on my face. And then I enjoyed trying to get them around to my way of thinking, or at least asking themselves a few questions. Should the United States have prohibition? Well, now, you take away all the people down through history who've drunk, and you'd be taking away all the great works of literature, practically all the works of genius that ever existed. Just how much of a poem you think you can get out of a glass of ice water? Does man have an immortal soul? Well, I debated this with a fellow who got real carried away. And he says, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Captain, hell, he won him a deckhand on a raft. Is life worth living? No. But there's a pretty girl over there who was a good argument for the other side. You know, one of the things I'd always believed in that was more unpopular than the labor movement was free love. Some people said I spoke of in the abstract and believed in it in particular on suitable occasions. But the truth is, after Ruby and I got married, she kept a pretty close eye on me. Besides, rumors of philandering don't do you nearly as much harm as the people who spread them would like to believe. And I was never too concerned about this until one day I was told that a district attorney had a picture of me, might have been tricked up, leaving the house of a beautiful widow woman at dawn. My friend said not to let it bother me. My enemies would believe the worst of me without the picture, and my friends would know it was a fake. They'd know if I spent the night at the house of a beautiful woman. I wouldn't have left at dawn. I'd stay for breakfast. I told a lot of young men starting out in life, cultivate friends, not acquaintances. Acquaintances are of no use to you unless you're planning to run for office. And I do hope you have a higher ambition in life than that. One of the things that we'd been taught when I was a little boy, growing up on the farm outside Kinsman, Ohio, and we accepted it as an article of faith, that any little boy growing up anywhere in the United States could eventually hope to become president of this great land and all its peoples. Well, with the presidents we've been having, I'm beginning to believe it. course, being a lawyer, that's a different kettle of fish. High art, requiring sophistication and the most rigid applications of the most scientific principles. Choosing a jury, for instance. If a Presbyterian enters the jury box and carefully folds up his umbrella, let him go. He is as cold as the grave. He knows right from wrong, but seldom finds anything that's right. Get him out of there before it contaminates the rest of them. If anything, Baptists are worse than Presbyterians. The sooner you get rid of them, the better. Now, Methodists are worth considering because they're closer to the soil. In fact, if chance ever puts you down between a Baptist and a Methodist, you move towards the Methodist to get warm. Lutherans and Scandinavians are both unsafe, but if rolled into one, just plead your client guilty and go down the docket. I've never been one for organized religion. You see, I find it hard to believe in something that tells you what you've got to believe and what will happen to you if you don't. The fear of God, like the fear of anything, is not the beginning of wisdom. It's better to have doubt. Doubt leads to investigation, and that is the beginning of wisdom. But still, I'm a lawyer, see. So I got to check these things out. So one time, Ruby and I went down to Palestine. You know where it all began. And we ran into this Arab boatman. He was going to roll us out to the very spot where Jesus walked on the water. But he wanted $15. No wonder Jesus walked. He couldn't afford to ride. The most righteous believers, of course, are the fundamentalists. People who believe that everything in the Bible should be accepted as literal fact. And they don't want anybody in the schools or anywhere else teaching anything any different. Noah took 2 of every species on the ark, including, I guess, 1 million insects. Balaam's ass spoke to him, probably in Hebrew. Well, a lot of asses have spoken in their time. Some, no doubt, in Hebrew, but they weren't that breed of ass. William Jennings Bryan, welcome to Tennessee, sir. Mr. Bryan, am I correct in calling upon you as an authority on the Bible? You are. Bully for you. And I bet you can quote me chapter and verse right straight through the King James Version, can't you? I don't suppose, though, that you've memorized too many passages from the Origin of the Species. You never read it? Well, how in perdition do you have the gall to whoop up a holy war about something you don't know anything about? How can you be so sure that the body of scientific knowledge, as systematized in the writings of Charles Darwin, is in any way irreconcilable with the spirit of the book of Genesis? Well, let's put it this way. Page 5. 5, the origin of the species, Darwin states it meant inadmissible. Inadmissible. All right. I get the scent in the wind. We'll play in your ballpark, Colonel. But first, let's get this straight. Now, this is the book that you're an expert on. Tell me, you believe everything in this book should be accepted literally? When do you take this place where it says, the whale swallowed Jonah? You believe that actually happened? Well, you're right. It says a great fish. But it's pretty much the same thing. What's your opinion about that? Oh, it was a miracle, huh? Well, I recollect another place in it here where it says, Joshua made the sun stand still. Now, as an expert, you tell me that's as true as this Jonah business, right? Pretty neat trick. You suppose Houdini could do it? Have you ever pondered what would naturally happen to the earth if the sun stood still? Well, if they say the sun stood still, They must have had a notion in those days that the sun moves around the earth. Now, you think that's the way of things, or don't you believe that the earth moves around the sun? You have faith in the Bible. Good, because you don't have any in the solar system. The sun stopped. All right, just as you say, the sun stopped. Now, if what you say factually happened, if Joshua halted the sun in the sky, now let's see, that means that the earth stopped spinning on its axis, continents toppled over one another, mountains flew out into space, and the earth, arrested in its orbit, shriveled to a cinder and crashed into the sun. How come they missed this little tidbit of news? It must have happened according to natural law. But don't you believe in natural law, Colonel? Would you like to ban Copernicus from the classroom along with Darwin? Pass a law to wipe out all scientific development since Joshua, Revelations, period? Now listen to this. This is Genesis 4:16. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, dwelt on the land of Nod in the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife. Where in the hell did she come from? Mrs. Cain, Cain's wife. At the beginning, there were only Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Where did this extra woman spring from? You ever figure that out? Never bothered you. Never tried to find out? You don't suppose they pulled off another creation in the next county, do you? You know, it frightens me to imagine the state of learning in this world if everybody had your driving curiosity. Now this book goes into a lot of begats. And Ephraxad begat Selah. And Selah begat Eber, and so on and so forth. Are these pretty important folk? The holy men and women of the Bible? Well, how'd they go about this begatting? I mean, did people get themselves begat in those days about the same way they get themselves begat today? In other words, these holy people were brought forth and conceived in the normal biological function known as sex. What do you think about sex, Colonel Bryan? I'm not asking what you think about sex as a husband or a father or a political candidate. You're up here as an expert on the Bible. What's the biblical evaluation of sex? Original sin? And all these holy people got themselves begat through original sin? All this sinning make them less holy? Yes. Yes, there is something holy to me. There is something holy to this agnostic. The individual human mind. And a child's power to master the multiplication tables. There is more sanctity than all your shouted amens, holy holies, and hosannas. An idea is a greater monument than a cathedral. And the advance of man's knowledge is more of a miracle than any sticks turned to snakes or the parting of waters. Are we now to halt the march of progress because Mr. Bryan frightens us with a fable? People, progress was never a bargain. You've got to pay for it. Sometimes I think there's a man behind the counter who says, all right, you can have a telephone, but you have to give up privacy, the charm of distance. Madam, you may vote, but at a price. You lose the right to retreat behind a powder puff or petticoat. Mister, you may conquer the air, but the birds will lose their wonder, and the clouds will smell gasoline. Darwin moved us forward to a hilltop so we could look back and see the way from which we came. But for this view, this insight, this knowledge, we must abandon faith in the pleasant poetry of Genesis. Then why did God plague us with the power to think, Mr. Bryan? What other merit have we? The elephant is larger, the horse is stronger and swifter, the butterfly more beautiful, the mosquito more prolific, and even the simple sponge is more durable. Or does a sponge think? Do you think a sponge thinks? Does a man have the same privileges as a sponge? Well, this man wishes to be accorded the same privilege as a sponge. He wishes to think. You take a thing like evolution, make it a crime to teach it in the schools. Eventually, you'll make it a crime to teach it in the church. And then you may ban books and newspapers. Maybe even burn books and newspapers. If you can do the one thing, you can do the other. Mr. Bryan died not long after that trial. They say that he died a broken man. It was that trial that broke him. Well, if that's true, I'm sorry. Because he was a good man. Oh, he was deluded. Yes. But he was a good man. A lot of people thought, the closer I got to my own final exams, I'd get religion. Well, I never did. I still believe that when I die, there won't be enough left over for heaven or hell. Ruby has a different idea. She believes in heaven and hell. She said it won't make any difference which one I go to, because I've got good friends in both places. Once after a debate, in which I said I didn't believe in the afterlife, this nice blonde came up to me and said, was there anything I did believe in? I used to believe in blondes. But that was a long time ago. Ruby and I have had a good life since we married. I've gone all over the country to try cases, and I wouldn't think of going anywhere without her, even if she'd let me. My son Paul is president of his own company now. He's got a wife and 3 lovely daughters. I go to visit them as often as I can. I'd like to take credit for Paul's success, but the only advice I remember giving him was not to bet in a no-limit poker game. I don't look forward to death because I don't want to give up my family and my friends, and especially now I've got grandchildren. I've lived so long, I've formed a habit. But I don't fear death because it brings peace and rest. And you know, I found that most people don't want another life. They just want to keep on living the same one they've got. That's an entirely different matter. You know, sometimes I wish I were younger or older. If I were younger, I'd go to the South Seas. I would. And if I were older, maybe I wouldn't care so much. I don't get out to the city much anymore. In fact, I hardly even leave this apartment. Ruby and I have lived here for 25 years, and we just don't want to move now that Paul and his family is so close. But now and then I get a letter from a friend of mine who asks me why he doesn't see me anymore. Has he done something to offend me? So I write him back, no, it's nothing like that. It's just that I'm just sort of letting go of things in general. But I'm always glad to see my friends, and he must come over to my house sometime, and I mean it. The next day, this old love seat lures me back into its depths, and I gaze out the window at the tops of the trees down in the park below, and that walkway winds through the velvety green grass on down to the lake that is so blue and so beautiful. And don't feel like going anywhere today. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll go visit my friends. Maybe. I'd feel a lot better about my work if I could believe there'd been any progress made in the law since I was admitted to the bar over 50 years ago. In science and mathematics, the world's been made over new. Even in religion, there's a broader, more modified attitude. The whole material world has been made over, but the law and its administration have stood frozen, adamant, defying time, eternity, and all the changes of our age. You want to know what the compensations have been? There's been only one. 102 men that I've defended stood facing the death penalty, and not one was ever hanged. And not one would be, because I wouldn't dare take another chance unless there were no other way. Why did they kill? Was it for hate, spite, money? They killed little Bobby Franks as they would a spider or a fly, for the experience. They killed him because they were made that way. Because somewhere in the infinite process that goes up to making the man and boy, something slipped. Now these two boys sit here, hated, despised, outcast, the whole community shouting for their blood. Your Honor, when the public is concerned and calls for a punishment, no matter what the offense, great or small, and that punishment is death. Not one of us is unmindful of the public, Your Honor. I have been standing here for 3 months, as one would at the ocean, trying to sweep back the tide. I hope the winds are falling, the waves subsiding. I believe they are. But I don't want to place any false pretense to this court. The easy thing to do, popular thing to do, would be hang Dickie Loeb and Babe Leopold. Men and women who do not think will applaud. The cruel and thoughtless will certainly approve. But more and more fathers and mothers are gaining an understanding and asking questions not only of these poor boys, but of their own. They will not join in any claim at the death of my clients. Instead, they would ask that the shedding of blood be stopped. Your Honor, you stand between the past and the future. I am with the future, and I know what I stand for. I am pleading for a time in which hatred and cruelty will not rule the hearts of men, and that we can learn through reason and judgment and understanding that all life is worth saving, and that mercy is still the highest attribute of man. But I wish to apologize for the time I've taken in this case. It may not be as important as I think it is. If I should succeed in saving the lives of my clients and done nothing for the progress of the law, I would be sad. But if I should succeed, my one reward, my one hope would be that somehow I'd helped human understanding temper justice with mercy and overcome hate with love. I was reading last night the aspirations of the old Persian poet Omar Khayyam.
I thought it was the highest aspirations a man could hope for. I wish it was my heart and the hearts of all men. So I be written in the book of love. I do not care about the book above. Erase my name, or write it as you will. So I be written in the book of love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
We enjoyed it.
If they got in.
Very nice, Derek.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.